Hi everybody, today we're going to compare the sizes of countries. Well, this map is totally wrong. So let's first compare some countries that you would know. First, let's compare the first country, UN country, alphabetically. We're going from A to Z. So there's going to be part 1 and 2. Let's see Afghanistan. Afghanistan is, you might think it's pretty small, but actually when you reach it to the United States, it reveals a secret. But when you put it in Florida, you could see that it could stretch all the way to Virginia. That is a big country. And when you place it with Iceland, you could see that it's actually way bigger. When you compare with Sweden and Finland, it is actually really big. Now you can see how big Afghanistan really is. Now it's time to see Albania. Okay, so Albania might not be huge, but let's just talk about how big it actually is. When you compare it with Italy, you could see actually it's pretty big. And when you compare it to France, it might seem small, but when you place it where Portugal is, you could see that it's actually really big. Now, when we compare with the United Kingdom doesn't seem big at all. But don't be afraid yet. Here comes the 10th largest country in the world, Algeria. So Algeria is really huge. When you place it where the United States is, you could see that it stretches from Texas all the way to Minnesota. And when you place it in Canada, it stretches from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, all the way to Northwest Territories and Nunavut. That is how big Algeria is. Andorra is a pretty small country though. So when you place it like this, you could see that it's between France and Spain. When you place it against Monaco, you see that it's pretty small. Where's Monaco? Ah, there it is. So here's Monaco, for instance. Monaco is actually smaller than we think it is. So Andorra is actually pretty big. Now let's see how big Angola is. Angola is also a pretty big country. That is Angola. When you place it in the DRC, you could see that it's actually about the same size. When you place it against Libya, you could see that it's way bigger than we think. Algeria is just slightly bigger. Same for Morocco and Western Sahara put together. When you place it against Brazil, you could see that it's about the same size. It's just a little teensy bit. It's just a lot smaller. But when you place it against other countries, you could see that's pretty big. Let's see. Antigua and Barbuda. It's a pretty small country. Yeah, you guessed, it is small. But when we place it against St. Kitts and Nevis, you can see it's way bigger. Guadeloupe even thinks it's pretty big. When you place it to Puerto Rico, it seems pretty small. When you place it against the Dominican Republic, it's also small. But it doesn't seem small against Anguilla. That's the only thing about Antigua and Barbuda. Argentina, the 8th largest country in the world, a pretty large site. See how big this boy is? When you stretch against Brazil, you could see that it's about the same size. When you stretch it all the way to Africa, you could see that it stretches from South Africa all the way to the DRC or the equator. And you could see that's about the same size as Europe. That is a big country. Yeah, Armenia might not be big, but still, it's pretty cool. But it's still actually about the same size as Georgia. It's a little smaller than Azerbaijan, but compared to Turkey, you could actually see it's visible. That is a pretty big, small country. And when you compare it to Tajikistan, you could see that it doesn't seem small at all. Here we go with Australia. Is a gigantic country. If you put it, wow. If you put it against Canada, you could see how actually big it is. That is how big Australia is. When you compare it to Greenland, Greenland looks like a little baby. When you compare it to Europe, it expands gigantically. It's bigger than all of these guys put together, the Arabic family. And when you place it in Africa, you could see that's not small at all. That is a really big country. When you compare it to Brazil, it looks like Brazil is about to get covered by it. That is really big. Austria is a pretty small place. Compared to other places, it's pretty small. But actually, compared to Italy, it doesn't seem small at all. Comparing to Spain and Portugal, it is actually big. And you could see that Austria is actually bigger than Portugal, Ireland, almost the same size as the United Kingdom, but it's quite snugly compared to Sweden and Norway. But you could see that Austria is way, way bigger than Denmark. Lithuania and Latvia compared together is actually really big too. Even compared to Estonia, it looks like a baby. That is really big. Azerbaijan, compared to others, is pretty small. But you can see that's bigger than Georgia, Armenia, almost as big as Turkey, about the size of Bulgaria, bigger than North Macedonia, bigger than Albania, almost as big as Italy. And compared to Sweden, it is not a baby. And when you compare it to Estonia and Latvia, it is almost as big as both of them combined. That's pretty big. Bahamas is a pretty small country in the Caribbean, but still, it is not that small. When you compare it to Florida, it doesn't seem small. But when you compare it to Mexico, it seems pretty snuggly. But when you compare it to other countries like Togo, for instance, I'm going to bring it there. You could see that Togo is actually pretty small. Bahrain is a pretty small place though. But don't panic yet. At least it's not the smallest. But Bahrain is quite snuggly to Qatar. That is how small Bahrain is. Smaller than cities. So Bahrain doesn't have any interesting stuff. Bangladesh is pretty big actually. If you don't believe me, let's compare it to Azerbaijan. As you can see, when we compare Azerbaijan to Tajikistan, it is actually about the same size. That is really big. When you compare it to Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, it's almost as big as all of them combined, all three of them. And when you compare it to Turkey, wow, it's not kidding. When you compare it to Greece, North Macedonia, it's almost as big as both of them combined. It's about the size of Romania and the Ukraine. Bigger than Moldova too. About the size of Belarus. That is a big place. So I'm not kidding about all of these. Barbados is also pretty big. As you could see, Barbados not big at all. But compared to others, it's actually pretty big. Compared to Trinidad and Tobago, it's pretty big, actually. When you compare it to Grenada, it's also pretty big, covering one island. That is a pretty big country in the Caribbean, for instance. Belarus is pretty big, too. When you compare it to, Poland is about the same size. Same for Germany. France too. Spain. Portugal is way smaller. When you compare it to Finland, it is not messing around. That is a big country. Belgium is not that big actually, only about the size of Belize, which is next. This is how big Belgium is, but it's not that small compared to Netherlands, about the same size. Compared to Ireland, it's actually about the same size too. It's almost as big as Scotland. It's bigger than Northern Ireland. About the same size as Iceland, too. That's pretty big, though. Belgium compared... Oh, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. Belgium's actually way bigger than Belize. Belize is next, which we were talking about earlier. You will see that Belize is about the size of Guatemala. That's actually pretty big. But it's actually about the size of Haiti. Puerto Rico is smaller, though. As you can see, it is actually bigger than all of the small Caribbean countries put together. That is actually pretty big. Putting it to Africa, it's about the size of the Gambia. It actually is bigger. After that, we come to Benin, the 19th country, the 19th UN country alphabetically. Benin is actually bigger than Togo. Did you know that? Liberia actually seems snuggly in Benin, though. Benin's actually bigger. Burkina Faso doesn't think Benin is that big, but still, it's pretty big compared. Mali even is not that big, only a few times the size of Benin. Benin's almost about the same size as Portugal already. It's actually pretty big compared to France. Same for Italy. Croatia is actually smaller. Albania is only about the half size of it that we talked about earlier. Romania is not even about the size of it yet. After that, we're reaching Bhutan. You see that Bhutan is only about the size of Nepal, less than half. About the size of Bangladesh, though. It's bigger than Sri Lanka. Compared, you see? It's actually about the same size, though. It's bigger than the only part of Thailand that's only about this big. Yeah, it's not bigger, though. It's way smaller. You could see that it is actually smaller than Taiwan. That's not that big, though. Bolivia is a gigantic place. See that it is really big. If you compare it to Peru, you could see just how big Bolivia is. Oh yeah, I forgot what I'm using. I'm using the true size of that website. The link is going to be in the description below. But let's get back. Bolivia is actually as big as Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana combined is not even bigger than Bolivia. Bolivia is bigger than all of these Caribbean countries put together. That is a gigantic place. It's almost bigger than Central America, almost as big as Mexico. It's about the same size as the Gulf of Mexico. It is bigger than a lot of US states. It is bigger than Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. It is also quite bigger than Ontario, but not as big as Quebec yet. When you compare it to Greenland, you can just see how big Bolivia is. See? That is a big place. Bosnia and Herzegovina is not the same thing. It's quite the opposite. But still, it is not small. It's not that small as we think it is. See, compared to Ireland, it's not small at all. Actually, compared to Iceland, you could just see how big it is. Compared to Greenland, it's quite snuggly. We'll mix up that part. Compared to Canada, it's way smaller than we think. But when compared to Nicaragua, you could just see how big it is. Only about the same size. And that's enough for today. And there's gonna be a part 2. I don't remember where we started off. See you later.